All right, so what we did last time was we added this extra little flourish in with the spiral kind of spinning out as the ghost is growing up. Now we want the same thing on the other side. Now we could duplicate this and flip it over and everything like that, but there's actually an effect, a shape effect that allows us to duplicate the shape in different ways. And you can even animate the duplication of the shape. So if you want to have something spiral out or something like that, you have the ability to do that. So let's first just look at how to duplicate it, and then I'll do a separate video with a different project that'll actually show us how to make a ring of duplications. So once again, you want to select your spiral group, and you're going to go to the Add section, and this time we're going to apply the repeater. And by default, it's going to give you 2 extra copies, and they're going to each be offset by, I believe it's 100 pixels. Let's see. Expand our repeater, copies, offset, composite, and down here underneath composite, you're going to see transform repeater 1. It might get clipped off a little bit like mine does, but it's a transform specifically for this repeater. So go ahead and expand that. Yes, and you'll see that by default the position is going to be at 100. Okay. So what we actually want is we just want 2 copies. So go ahead and take your copies and switch to 2. That'll change the number of copies you have. For your position, we'll leave it at 100. And we need to have one of them flip backwards. So to do that, we're going to have to put a negative number in our scale. Now we only want it to flip backwards along the x-axis, or on the x-axis. We don't want the y to flip. So go ahead and unconstrain your proportions by clicking on the chain. Select the first number and just type a negative in front of it, and that'll flip it around. Then you can increase your position, and that'll cause it to slide over. We'll test it to make sure that it's not colliding with our ghost as it grows up, and it looks good. So we get a perfect copy of our other one, just reversed on the other side. Now, let me explain a couple of these other properties as well, so we can see what they do. And you don't have to actually make adjustments to this. It might actually screw up your project if you're doing that. So we see copies. We understand what that means. It's going to be the number of instances of it. Underneath that is our offset. And this actually changes how these values get pushed into our copies. So right now, we've only got 1 copy. We can see that the position is at 428. That means it moves 428 pixels to the right. And then our scale is at negative 100. Now that's being applied as these exact numbers. If we increase the offset, change it to 1, we'll see that everything gets pushed over a little bit more. So now our first one's getting pushed over 428, and this one's getting pushed over another 428. If you choose a negative number, it's going to go in the opposite direction. So it just depends on whatever your number you put in here is how these get affected. Okay. So that's pretty easy. Now let's look at how to do this in a different way. We'll make a spiral using repeater. And I'm going to reuse my path again. So what I'll do is, instead of making this into a whole new composition, I'm just going to duplicate my layer. You can duplicate your layer by going up to Edit, Duplicate, or you can use the hotkeys Command D. Now with the duplicate, what I'm going to do is hide my original. Then I'll go into my duplicate layer, and I'm going to delete my puddle ghost. Now make sure you don't delete your puddle ghost on your first one. We just want to do this on this so we can see how to work with the repeater in a different way. We're just doing a very basic thing when we do the a simple duplicate mirroring. So we're not going to add in another repeater. What we're going to do is we're just going to go into our existing repeater and make some adjustments to it. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to have it spiral out, and we'll have, let's say, 6 spirals. Make a full circle. So I'm going to set my copies to be 6. You can see that now they're going to go way off the screen. You can't even see all of them. Then I'm going to go into my transform, and I'm going to reset these values. Reset, reset. And that'll get everything back to being 0 in our position and 100% on our scale. And instead, we're going to work with our rotation. Now what we want to do is we want to make a full circle with these. So we got to think about how many copies that is and how many degrees that's going to be. So a full circle is 360 degrees. We would divide that by 6 to find out what our rotation degrees are going to be. Now we could use a calculator. If you're good with math, you can even use your head to do this. But there's a little trick that you can do with a lot of Adobe programs. You can actually pump mathematical equations into these number values instead. So I'm going to type 360 divided by, which is the backslash, 6. And that way it figures it out for me. It figures out that it's 60 degrees. Now, these are all spiraling, but they're spiraling from a different spot than we want. So as we've learned in a previous lesson, the way that things rotate and the way that things scale is all based off of what's called a transform point, or an anchor point in After Effects. So what we need to do is we need to make an adjustment to the anchor point. Unfortunately, we can't see where that anchor point is in here, so we're doing this a little bit blindly. Basically what you want to do is you just want to make adjustments to your X and Y value until you can try to get them so they're all kind of spiraling out from the original one's starting point. From there, you can either push it down or over. I would only push it in one dimension, and that makes a really nice spiral out of it. Now we get all of them spiraling out. You also have the ability to change some of these other properties if you like. For instance, you can do a scale. And if we lower the scale, what it's going to do is each instance is going to get smaller and smaller. If you increase the scale, each instance is going to get larger and larger. And let's also look at the offset again, now that we have a more interesting property to work with. So the offset, as I was explaining before, actually affects how these values get applied to the new instances, the copies. So right now they're being applied so that each one has an extra 60 degrees. So 0 degrees, 60 degrees, 180 degrees, or I'm sorry, 120 degrees, 180 degrees, 240, 300, and then if we had another one, it'd be back to 360, and it just kind of keeps spiraling down. If you adjust this, let's say we put in -1. Now instead, this one's going to be larger instead of getting smaller, and it's going to rotate backwards. I know it looks like it's kind of in the same spot, but technically it is rotating backwards. This one's at like a -60 degrees. Or if I put in 2 here, instead of having it start at the right size, it's going to start here and then spiral down. So that's the way the repeater works. Now that we've seen it, you can either hide or delete this layer and then turn the visibility back on for your ghost layer. I've got pretty much everything we need for this little shape animation. Now we just want to composite it together with our background, which is our Photoshop file. So to do this, what we're going to do is we're going to make a main composition to put our other 2 compositions in. So go up to Composition, choose New Composition, or Command-N. Set it to 1280 by 720, which is the HDV, HDTV size. That'll match the same size as our other 2 files. And we'll call it Main. Okay. Now this is a good point to start organizing our project panel over here. I know it's not getting too cumbersome, but it's a good habit to get into. So what I usually like to do is I'll leave my main just on the main drive of it. That way it's really easy to find. But then these are going to be what's called pre-comps, and they're kind of like groups that are placed inside of your main group. And these pre-comps are going to be put into a pre-comp folder. And that way, it's a little bit easier to sort through and find things in here. And it's good to kind of set a good structure for yourself. Once we get a little bit more into importing, you might want to make a source file. And within that source file, you could do audio, video, PSDs, AI files. And that way everything's a little bit more organized. But that's something that becomes more advantageous with really large projects. For now, we can start to organize this. So I'm going to make a new folder by clicking on New Folder down here. I'm going to call it Pre-Comps. And I'm actually going to store my pre-comps with their source layers. Some people like to store them separate from one another. I think it's better to store them together. It's just a matter of preference. So inside our main composition, then we can take both our ghost puddle and our texture compositions, and we'll just drag them down. Make sure that your texture is on the bottom layer. We can see our ghost puddle on top. Now, I don't really like the contrast of this, so if we want to make adjustments to it, we would have to go inside of the texture pre-comp. To do that, you would just double click it down here. I'm going to go to my curves, effect controls. Looks like I got disconnected again. There we go. And I just want to make it darker. Overall, just darker. And I'll switch back to my main composition down here. All right, now it's standing out a little bit better. What could help too is if you do like a drop shadow effect on the ghost to make it pop out even more. So combine your compositions together. Make adjustments to make it as strong as you can make it.